So, hello everyone. Today I'm going to do a video that has been requested by quite a lot of people. There won't be any visuals, you will just be seeing this box. It will be a comparison between the Middle-earth CCG, which was released by ICE in the 90s, and the Lord of the Rings LCG, which is a Fantasy Flight Games product. So people have been wondering, because I play both, what my take is on these two. Well, first of all, everyone who's been attending my channel knows that I am a Tolkienist. I've got many of games, many games that are based on his franchise or on the Tolkien storylines. I'm also very interested in Tolkien's work from a scholarly perspective, from an academic perspective. I've read his work, I've read books about him, I've read books about his work, and I think I've read everything that he's ever written. So I know quite a lot about Tolkien, I know quite a lot about his world, and I'm interested in seeing this world come to life in other media, and gaming, in my opinion, is a medium unto itself. There are different types of games, as you know. There are role-playing games, there are board games, and there are card games. And the MECCG is no longer available. You can still buy it, but it's no longer produced. And anything you get today is, some people say, very expensive. I don't know. I mean, I actually bought these ones, and this is one of the limited edition expansion packs for the Dark Minions. And I paid as much for the whole box as I would have paid back then if I just bought individual boosters. So I don't think that the prices have skyrocketed, maybe with the exception of the Balrog expansion or Balrog boxes, which even then were very expensive and which are very, very difficult to come by these days. And I would never buy them. Somebody once said on Facebook, I've got the two sets. How much do you think I could make if I sold them? And I wrote back saying, well, you know, that's neither here nor there. There is no fixed price for this. You say you want, I don't know, 600 euros. And then if somebody's willing to pay 600 euros, then you can make 600 euros. I, for example, wouldn't pay more than 100 euros per pack. That's all I would pay. If you want more, then, you know, you'll have to find somebody else to buy it. I'm not that desperate. So what are the two games? The two games, let's start with the similarities that go beyond the fact that they are both set in Tolkien's world. And more precisely, the world of the Lord of the Rings. As you know, the Silmarillion is off limits. You cannot set anything in the Silmarillion world because it's held by Christopher Tolkien, whereas the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit is not part of that, and they can be used if you have the rights to them. So ICE also produced a Lord of the Rings role-playing game in the 90s, but they lost the license, and I think they probably lost it when the films came out and then it was transferred to other people. Anyway, so they are both deck construction games. So that means that you don't draft cards while you're playing from an offering and pay for them like you would in a deck builder like Aliens or Harry Potter Hogwarts Battle, but you pre-construct your deck and then you draw from your deck. So you know exactly what you will be getting because you put the cards there in the first place. From a mechanical point of view, the MECCG relies on you, I would say, using a map. A map definitely helps because you're moving between places, whereas the and as you can see, most people will actually be using a map. There are people who use region movement. There are people who use site movement. These are two things that are implemented. I think beginners are it's recommended that beginners use site movement and always move between a haven and a site and then back to a haven and then to another site. But you know, this is just a recommendation. You don't have to. And then you have region movement, which I've never used, where you have actual cards of regions and then you use a map to see what gets key to this particular region and what kind of hazards you could play. Art-wise, I would say that the LotR LCG has a high and very consistent standard of card art card art. I've never seen a single card that I didn't like, where I thought the art was off. I may not have liked the picture itself, but the art was always of a high standard. Here, however, in the MECCG, it is the artsy kind of art, where you have a very inconsistent level of art, because you have very many different people contributing art. Some art is very, very artsy, where you kind of go, yeah, that is an artist trying to express themselves, and very, very good. And sometimes you look at it and you kind of go, yeah, I don't know. That was a big miss. With the LotR LCG, I would say it's more like graphic design. So it's not really, I would say, real artists. Whereas here apparently there is John Howe in there somewhere. I've not seen him. But there are artists whose names are known in the Tolkien world in these games. And some have a very interesting style and some have a style where I'm like, meh. For the LotR LCG, it's just graphic design. It's always of the same standard. There are no big misses. There are no big hits. But it is very uniform. Whereas here it is very, very diversified. For those of you who want to check it out, there are two types of the card Twilight. There is one where you can see some weird elves sitting on horses looking really sad. And then there is, which I think is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, the card art or the character card of Adrazar, it's just terrible. I mean, seriously, it's garish, it's terrible. It's drawn by somebody who doesn't look like they know what they were doing. And they're probably highly paid artists and super great, and it's high art, but I'm like, yeah, well, you know, that was a miss. But then the other Twilight card, which exists, is which is miles better, not only compared to the old Twilight card, but it's actually very evocative and it's really lovely art. This is something where I could imagine myself blowing it up and putting it up as a wallpaper, for example, on my laptop. So art-wise, I would say this one is a hit and miss. LotR LCG, constantly high. Mechanics, and this is where the games diverge completely, because the MECCG, as it was first devised, is it's a conflict game. The idea is that you choose one wizard, so you and your opponent each choose one wizard, and you've got 5 to choose from: Palando, Gandalf, Radagast, and Saruman and Alatar. So one of the 5 Istari. And it is the idea of the game that you are trying to gain influence. You're gaining influence by summoning people to your call. And the call is always to fight Sauron. So at that stage, Saruman is still a good guy. And Radagast hasn't succumbed to the lure of nature, as it were. And you're trying to assemble an army, as it were, a small army at that stage, to then go to a moot and get everyone to fall in behind you to fight. So the idea is that one of the 2 wizards will win out and will impose his will on everyone else and direct the fight against Sauron, which is completely unthematic, but that's the way they play the game. And so you do this by putting together marshalling points. And marshalling points can be won by adding characters, adding factions, or adding items, And if you have a certain number of marshalling points, I believe it's 25, you can then call a whatever they call it, a council or whatever. And then the other player, I think, has one more round. I'm not sure on those rules because I've never played it this way. And then you compare marshalling points, and then whoever has the most wins. And the idea is that you're trying to assemble as many marshalling points as you can, and at the same time you're trying to prevent your opponent from doing the same thing. And you're doing this by playing resources, which are the marshalling point bearing cards, usually for yourself, and hazards, which are the cards that will throw a spanner in the works of your opponent. So you have a movement phase, you move to a different location usually, or you can stay where you are, and then I can play hazard cards on you or against you. They say you play them on them, but you're actually playing against the other opponent. They can be enemies that they need to fight. They can be corruption cards. They can be events. And you're trying to destroy your other, your opponent's characters. You're trying to destroy their factions by, for example, making them to disperse and so on and so forth, so that you can get as many marshalling points as you possibly can while making sure that they don't get anything else. The LotR LCG is completely different in that it is a cooperative game, and there is no way you can play against someone, at least not so far, and maybe they're going to change this at some point, but it is a cooperative game. The main difference, the second main difference then, is that since this is a conflict-based game where you're essentially trying to get victory points, there is no story here. You're just basically, you're free to put into your deck whatever you like. You can go to any place you like. You can go to, you can put in whatever items you like. You can put Narsil in there. Even if you're not Aragorn, even if you're none of these people, you put Narsil in there and then that's it. You know, that's what you can do. And if you manage to equip Narsil, if you manage to play Narsil, you gain its abilities, you gain its corruption points as well, and you gain its marshalling points if it's got any, I don't know. But for example, you could do this. But it doesn't matter who you are, and your opponent could probably do the same thing. I'm pretty sure, because there is no story that is being told. It's really just assembling victory points. The LotR LCG, however, is based on a story. Each pack comes with a story that it's telling. You may not necessarily like the story, you may not find it intriguing, you may not even like the mechanics that they use to tell the story, but there is a story there. And the story is told using location cards and enemy cards and sometimes items and other things. And the third difference is, in the LotR LCG, you always know what cards you get because everything comes as a set deck. So you buy a pack and you know exactly what cards are in there. Here you do have starter decks, but then the rest is done through boosters. So you could be getting these, you know, a booster that contains 15 cards and you buy it and you get all of the cards that you already have and you don't really need them. So you don't really know what kind of cards you will be having. And I think this impacts the way the cards are structured, and it has to, because there is a lot of synergies between the cards in LotR LCG within a pack, but also within a deluxe expansion and cycle, but also across cycles. Whereas here, there is a lot less synergies. There are some, I'm not saying that they're not there, but since they don't really know what kind of cards the player will have, putting a lot of emphasis on synergies between cards, which are not part of a set deck, and mostly it is boosters, would make this game unplayable. So there's a lot less synergies between the cards, and when I play cards from the MECCG, I really don't feel like I'm telling a story. There are people who are trying to put together and have been trying to put together story-based scenarios. There is one guy who's got a really nice WordPress thing, blog or whatever you want to call it. But he also says, I'm just going to tell you what the idea behind it is. I'm not going to tell you what cards to put in your deck, because that would only tell you what cards I have. But since I don't know what cards you have, because I can't know because of the haphazard way you get the cards when it's all booster based, I'm just going to give you a general gist. And I played a couple of his scenarios on my channel, and you can watch them, and they are quite evocative. But I also have to say, sitting there and actually putting together those decks is a lot of effort, and it's maybe not really my, I mean, I really have to kind of concentrate and say, yes, I'm going to sit down with all of the cards that I've got, and I've got many, and I haven't even unboxed everything that I've got, and then put together an evocative deck that fits his story. Although when you do put in the time, you get a really nice storytelling, but his decks are really, and his scenarios are really difficult. I've never won even one. And I thought I could sit down and create my own, but I lack the imagination, and I tried to use one from the TOR, the One Ring RPG, and you saw me play that, and that was very hit and miss, simply because I just didn't spend enough time on it, and yeah, it's very difficult. But that's also not what this game is about. The MECCG is not about telling stories, it's about victory points. The LotR LCG is very much about telling stories, And they're also trying to tell stories using different mechanics. And I know that one of the most hated quests seems to be a journey to Rosgobel, where you have to save an eagle that has been injured, and they have mechanics to go with this, or the hunt for Gollum, where they have mechanics that go with this. And I love that. A lot of people hate it, but I think that they did a really good job using cards, and only cards, no dice, not like the Pathfinder ACG, just cards to try and tell this story. So I can't really say that I dislike MECCG, because I've never played it the way it was intended to be played, namely as an opposed game where you try to thwart your opponent's efforts to make more marshalling points than you have. For a solo player, it is more a nostalgia trip. I like playing it because I like some of the cards, and I like the idea of Tolkien, and I like, you know, the idea of maybe just throwing together a deck. And I'm going to use the solo variant that I was talking about earlier. They've, in the meantime, updated it and updated the rules, and they've come out with a couple more player mats. I'm definitely going to put in a game of this before I go back to work in the new year, and I'm going to film it too. But I think for the solo player, or for somebody who's really into Tolkien and into storytelling, the LOTR LCG is the better option. Even if they were still both in the market and both available, I would always say go with the LOTR LCG, because if you're interested in storytelling, that's where you need to go. So some people say, should I get into this? Well, you can. It's still possible to get cards, but of course also be aware that at some point all of the cards that have ever been produced will have been sold. So, you know, it's going to be probably a lot less easy to expand your collection if you're a collector. But also be aware that the idea behind this game, MECCG, is to play against someone. For the solo player, it is problematic, I would say. It depends really on how much you love Tolkien and how big your imagination is, and how much you actually like playing against the Arda rules, which are pretty much you have a huge deck and you just draw cards and then you just hope for the best. So that is my take on this. I would never part with either of those games. And if you're a Tolkien fan and if you like cards, that's very important. You really need to like cards. This one comes with dice as well, so you also have this additional element. But if you like cards and if you like Tolkien, then I think either of these games could be of interest. If you are somebody who really wants to play opposed, don't go to the LOTR LCG, because there is no way you can play it opposed. You can only ever play against the quest. And that's, I think, the most important difference. LOTR LCG has quests. This one doesn't. This one has an opponent. This is an opposed game, and it's not a storytelling game. So that's my take on things, and I wish you all a happy rest of the day. Bye-bye.